After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Hey folks, welcome back to Greenhouse Gaslighting. As you can see, we've got the new rebrand. Still us. Still talking about shit we don't understand. And that's why I always invite our most... Yeah, I think you've really racked up the W's on most appearances now, Josh. So please welcome DC correspondent Joshua. Oh my fucking god, I was about to dox you, dude.
I don't think it's too much.
Please welcome DC correspondent Josh.
Well, it's always great to be here. Doxed or not doxed, whatever. I like the new branding. I think it really reflects the new ownership under the Forward Party.
This is correct. They sent us graphic designers. They told us that under the Yang dictatorship, everyone will be guaranteed 2 graphic design packages in addition to their UBI package.
What more do you want?
I mean, dude, we can get the whole nation to start streaming on Twitch, bro. That's exactly what we need.
Yeah,
we're talking about the information age. Let's get to the content age.
I think we're already in the content age.
Yeah, no, we've been there.
We've been now.
Yeah. Well, as of the time of recording of this episode, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has created a bit of an international dispute by entering Taiwan and raising tensions with China, allegedly. So if you're still listening to this in the wreckage of a charred and wrecked Earth, what are you doing?
No, I think stick around. This is probably better than anything else you could be doing. You don't have much options if you're listening to this.
Not that I expect it to explode into anything. It's probably just going to be more
and
bizarre.
Listen, members of Congress visit it all the time. Yes, they're usually not this high ranked. But it seems to, the administration has not endorsed this trip. They've recommended against it. They've come out and said they, still support the one China policy. This is just I think it's just, this will be forgotten about in a few days or whenever her flight comes back. I do not, the one thing I'm nervous about is, I don't think it'll happen, but I don't want, Nancy Pelosi to be cast in the role of Franz Ferdinand.
Oh God.
I think we could do better.
There were at least a good amount of jokes of is she going to come out in the kente cloth and kneel as soon as she lands in Taiwan? Is there going to be some weird, bizarre performative speech or whatever? It definitely is one of those things that makes you wonder, okay, is this more like foreign policy projecting kind of stuff because Ukraine has kind of fallen off the radar in terms of what people are talking about? Which funny I mentioned that. I don't think I told you. I saw my first Azov battalion bumper sticker in the wild today.
Really? That's a little
just unprovoked on somebody's Honda, man.
Huh. Man, or it's a bit of a drive to, Crimea from here, but we'll see if they make it.
Yeah, I always thought that was some highly online stuff, but then it's putting it on your car. Well,
that's, to be fair, that is pretty it's not online, but it's complete performative stuff, which is kind of the theme of this episode. Looking at the itinerary, but yeah, this is the real mystery here is will after Nancy Pelosi gets back on the plane, are we going to get some 24-hour news coverage of Wolf Blitzer discussing what happened to that flight?
It's funny because we've talked about the news cycle and a quote unquote they pressing the news button every time they need something to happen. And I'll admit it has been a bit of a quiet cycle lately. Maybe it's just because I haven't been getting out much. Maybe it's because I'm not paying too much attention. But there were like storm events in Missouri, for example, that like no one seems to be talking about right now. Compared to like the heat wave that was kind of on everyone's lips last year, right?
Yeah.
And I'm almost wondering, like, does the Biden administration have a kind of play? And there's no way to prove this, right? But it's just like, okay, send Nancy to Taipei. Come on, Jack.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't expect a whole lot to come from this. I think I probably wouldn't, think about it too much. I think you're just gonna get yourself more stressed out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's exactly no point in being too much of a anxiety-ridden hamster looking at the headlines. Like
Speaking of anxiety, have you voted in the primary yet?
I mean, I'm lucky that I live in an area where I can do absentee voting. It's bizarre how much targeting happened like in the last 2 weeks as opposed to the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll freely admit, I feel a little bit bad about it. I did not vote today. I don't plan on it. I looked at the ballot. I saw that one party was basically unopposed in this district, and everyone else has these fun new districts. I'm stuck with the McLean district, and it was like, well, do I vote to like sabotage? But then it's like, I mean, there's really no lesser of the evils on like the governor's side. Like, I guess the lesser is just not Tudor Dixon, but there's four options. Like, I don't know who like the most likely person to upset that is. It's a weird race, and like, I think if it was more high profile, I feel like we would have probably covered it more. But and like, because weird stuff has happened, right? I mean, for those unfamiliar with the Michigan gubernatorial race, I mean, like, 2 of the front runners on the Republican side and like a few others were like terminated off the ballot because they didn't have enough signatures. Another was arrested by the FBI, I believe, or had his home raided at the very least. And then you're just left with these 5 who have been like scrambling. And a couple weeks ago, and like, I was just flipping through the channels and saw they had the debate at our alma mater of all places.
Yeah, and that was the kind of thing where it's like, it's right in our backyard. If I knew about it, I would have been like, oh, let me go to the front table and just be like, can we get a press pass? Like, I would have totally wanted to do that.
And what is funny too, because it's like, I mean, I definitely have, at least I'm sure you have as well, but like, we've hosted events in that exact location.
Wasn't one of the ones where Mitt Romney, when he was running, they did it at
the school, but it was at the basketball arena.
So
it was a lot bigger league, and I'll never forget this because there was a high school conference we had there for Model United Nations, and I made a joke because that was the debate that Rick Perry said he was going to terminate 3, branches of the executive bureaucracy, and he forgot which the third agency was.
Yeah,
and it was like, oops, and that like sank his whole campaign. And I made that joke, and everyone's like, "Who's Rick Perry?" I'm like, "Well, he was just appointed energy secretary, but fuck him, I guess." Like,
yeah,
it just had like it was the moment I felt the most boomer that I've ever felt, and I'm like, I'm not even like I'm. At this point, it's like I'm fresh out of college. Like, what the heck?
It is like that, and it just like, when you consider the reality that there's a lot less people who are paying attention to electoral politics than people who are, and then you bust into a conversation like, but who's that? Yeah, you can be mad and be like, y'all need to vote, but then you have to have that self-awareness moment of like, oh man, I pay too much attention to this shit. But yeah, to your point about the primary season here in Michigan, I don't blame you for not necessarily voting, because I really only voted for one area.
Well, but you actually have one, because like you have the
congressional
districts. So you have the 2 incumbents to choose from, whereas like I'm like, I don't have anything. And I'm like,
But that was the only competitive thing, because otherwise, like
Yeah.
every other item, they didn't even have like a primary contender except for like state senate. There was the guy who's the incumbent, very boilerplate, boring,
Sure.
saccharine Democrat. And then the other guy running was a crank who basically was campaigning on YouTube, just vlogging, and like each vlog was like 40-second increments basically. So
Okay.
uh so he would like he was saying stuff like like he was talking about the working class. He was talking about, fat cats in the state capitol. I'm like, okay, I like what this guy has to say. Then I watched like a professional interview that like a newspaper put on, where they
That was
just like,
longer than 40 seconds.
yeah, where they they have like those 40 questions, they give it to every candidate in the race, so at least someone's on the record. And then this guy is, I'll send you the video after this, man. It
Oh
was
yeah,
it
I
was
look forward to
amazing.
that.
But it was the kind of thing where he's talking, and he's like, and the third thing we got to do is budgets, okay? Whether you're the city of Ferndale, the Roman Empire, even Macomb County, okay, budgets are everything. And I'm just like, where did this pop up? Where did this pop up? And it was a question about education.
A win in Macomb, I guess. But
Well, it's so yeah, I voted for him on principle as a failed content creator.
but like, you at least had like not even that they're not necessarily competitive races. I mean, the congressional one seems to be competitive,
but the whole ballot is just like one person under each title. Like,
yeah,
what's the point of showing up if they're gonna get the title?
but you
anyways?
at least had two. I had pretty much none. I mean, there was stuff on the Republican side, and in Michigan has like a semi-open primary where you get to choose one side of the ballot and just vote for whoever you want on that side. But it was like, no, like, I mean, there's like the Democratic side is like, all right, well, Whitmer's uncontested. The congressional seat is a sacrificial lamb, uncontested.
Yeah, and then like the Republicans are like an open race, and they're all like the Trump brand Republican, but
Yeah.
none of them have the juice that Trump has. You know what I mean? No one.
But
like,
so when I was watching that debate for like a few minutes, I was like, this is basically like the B movie budget version, like the Sci-Fi Channel version of like the Republican primary debates from like 2016. Because it's like
the presidential ones.
Yeah, like because they're like having the same like petty arguments, but it's over like the most inside baseball stuff you'll ever hear. Like where it's like they're talking about like meetings of the DeVos family. Like, oh well, you're mad that like after this meeting with this group you weren't chosen. It's like, actually I'm talking about this meeting with this other group, and it's like, what the fuck? Who cares?
Who would?
Like, and it's like I'm like, I'm saying, like, I'm sure there's some of their electorate that does, but it's like this is such like. I don't think the average voter has any idea what you're talking about. And like it's all like code words basically, like where it's like, oh, like like this group is gonna trigger like I guess certain donors, like, oh hey, I'm actually part of that group. That my money's going indirectly to this guy. Maybe I should directly donate or something. I don't know, but it was bizarre. They were catty with each other. It was like, but like again, none of them had that like presence of a Donald Trump.
Yeah, just the guy on the hot mic wrong. Like none of them have the juice really.
Yeah,
they want to, and I think like the big contender now, aside from Tudor, is who's this fuck Garrett Soldano.
I couldn't remember who like the second like one was. And she only seems to be the primary one because like the DeVos family's like, yeah, we're gonna go with her. Everyone else is gone that we liked.
Yeah. The thing that like got me about Garrett Soldano, like his whole shtick is like he's mad that the COVID restrictions happened, and it's like, buddy, we have now overcorrected by pretending that there aren't two pandemics going on at the same time.
Right.
Like you're free to make out with random strangers now in open public. Doesn't matter that there's monkeypox and COVID still.
As long as they're not the same sex as you.
Right. And that's the second thing, because like so just, like a fun thing too. I really don't like watch TV. I haven't had cable in a long time, So the only time I ever see like cable ads is when I'm at the gym. That was my first time seeing a Garrett Soldano ad, and the whole ad was just like being mad about trans people. And I'm just like, there's nothing. There's like, I know it's bad. Like I'm against the transphobia, and these guys are idiots. But then when you think about like what can they even get out of that? It's just like being. It's like when you catch someone watching some nasty porn, and then they do the thing where it's like, oh my god, you see this shit? Hey, you see this shit? Hey, this is fucked up, man. Like that's basically what it is.
Yeah, it's so, and like this wasn't at the it was at the debate, but it wasn't on the debate, where like some news crews were like asking them questions, and like obviously like the abortion thing is obviously a hot topic because of, you know, Roe v. Wade being overturned. And like, well, like, you know, are you then open with like same-sex couples adopting kids? And I can't remember who it was, but he was just like, well, you know, I really question in that environment whether or not that's best for the kids. It's like, yeah, because like your kids are going to bully the shit out of them for having two dads. Like that's basically all it is. It's just like, yeah, well, like, you know, you realize how hard it is to be raised by same-sex parents. Think of all the social ridicule I'll give you.
What a
I said, I don't think it was Soldano, it was one of the others, but like they're all like interchangeably just like
it's the same three things with these people: COVID restrictions, gay bashing, and transphobia. They have no other agenda.
And it's wild too, because like until, you know, I would say a few months ago, I was like pretty certain like this was like a slam dunk race for Republicans to pick up. I was like, Whitmer is like this really polarizing figure because of the COVID stuff, and like you're gonna have all these like low
And
information
Whitmer has
voters
no
by
real
that.
juice either. You know what I mean? Like she has sympathy from like Democratic Party loyalists with the whole kidnapping
She's got more.
plot.
I think she like, you know, I think she has more than like the Democratic Party in general doesn't have a whole lot of juice. Let's be honest.
That's true. That's true.
But that, and so I was thinking like, I'm like, you know, like I think she's more charismatic than like Joe or Nancy. Like, you know, you know, if she was going to Taiwan, then maybe we could have a real issue.
Yeah. No, but that's a fair point. That like it just like there's a lot of like sound and fury, but it's equally flaccid in the Republican primary here in Michigan.
Yeah.
So yeah, speaking of the other open race in the district I live in, it is this. I don't know how much national coverage this race is getting. It's Andy Levin versus Haley Stevens. To kind of categorize this, like you said, redistricting's happened in Michigan. These two districts have fused, so now they're basically fighting each other for the same, like for the new district. Stevens, very boilerplate Democrat, had
only been around for what? This is her
second
term. Yeah,
second term, and her claim to fame before this is she helped out with the auto recovery plan under Obama. And also, she took Mike Bloomberg's money, which put her on a list in the 2020 presidential primary. So there's that. She's very corporate aligned, very said to be willing to work with the Republicans, quote unquote. Not a whole lot of juice. Very recurring theme here. Then there's Andy Levin, scion of the Levin family. So I think he's the son of former Congressman Sandy Levin, nephew of former Senator Carl Levin. The Levins are kind of a political dynasty here in Michigan. And
yeah, I want to say there might be one more before them both. I could be wrong, but yeah, they're very long established. Carl and Sandy both served for forever.
Yeah, for a very, very long time. They had the dignity to retire at some point, thankfully, but yeah. He would represent, I think, if not the second generation of Levin family congressional members, the third. So it's kind of interesting how he's been able to now brand himself as like a unity progressive candidate. And here's what I mean by this is that like he's been able to rack up endorsements from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Rashida Tlaib, like very, very distinct ideological strands within the Democratic Party. And I mean, it's not like he doesn't have a history of labor support, but what's
Oh, also
been
interestingly, he's also only been in as long as Stevens has been. I didn't realize that. I
yeah,
thought he
this is
was there a
also his
little bit
second term.
longer.
Yeah, he was very fresh to the thing, and I think he was representing his father's district,
Yeah.
which is a very, at least at the time, a very small set of cities near Detroit.
Yeah.
Heavily gerrymandered. It's a little less now, but eh. So, it's I don't doubt that he might be decent in his positions and convictions, but what I found personally kind of not necessarily unnerving, but just like it made me side eye the whole thing is like it's good that the guy has the right principles and everything, but why are we still not having this conversation about political families never seeming to leave the Democratic Party? And it ties into the whole thing about seniority and adherence to norms, and like the Levins are one of many families that curry favor within it. I mean, the Kennedys being the most famous, the
Well, and
Roosevelt,
also from Michigan, Dingles.
the Dingles. Yeah, I mean that was a husband and wife duo, right?
Yep, and his dad, he inherited his seat.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of Michigan. I mean, even in like Detroit city politics, you have like the Young family.
You had the Kilpatricks until their son got a little horny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, but that's what I'm saying is like we don't necessarily have machine politics in Democratic circles anymore.
Sure.
So the equivalent is like dynasties.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. That was the whole thing where it was just like, yeah, I'll tick the name on the ballot, but can we not like pretend that this is a grand like revolutionary moment? We're just putting another member of the Levin family in. I got nothing bad to say, but this is not radical politics, dog.
Oh, well, what is these days?
Working at Lockheed Martin and having a pit crew avatar.
I think that's pretty bog standard. I don't think that's radical at all, actually.
Oh man. So yeah, that was politics corner. We did not script that.
No, and I was thinking about that because I was like, I had been thinking about it. I'm like, well, like, how often do we record on an election day? Like, we gotta at least touch on it. But
I mean, see, with absentee voting now, like you could just forget that like voting day was a thing.
Sure. Well, and for me, like I said, like I could practically walk to my precinct. They did move it from a school to a church, which I think says a lot. But either way, it's still more or less the same spot. I could literally walk down to, but I'm like, I'm just circling names that are already there.
Literally, if it's a primary and there's no contested seats,
Yeah, like,
why show up? And it's like, well, it's your civic duty. I'm like, okay, you could still show up to the polling place.
Well, I mean, that shows how much that kind of weighs on me. The fact that I feel a little bit bad about it, but I'm like, it's
we again, like we say, civic religion. We are apostates of it in effect, and we bear a heavy toll on our conscience for it.
But yeah, it's like, yeah, there's not like real contests, and like again, like it was fun probably for people in 2014 to vote for Rick Santorum, but like that's where the whole party is now. It's not like you're not putting out like, oh, this is this unviable radical. It's like, oh no, they're all the same.
No, Rick Santorum is the most left-wing member of the Republican Party right now.
Oh, come on. I don't know about that.
I'm playing. Oh god.
Like Romney's at least, in politics, and that was literally he was in that race.
I don't know if I told you about this too. I have a plan in place to work on some of these Michigan political dynasties on the Republican side.
Oh, yeah?
And I want to do a couple episodes on the Romneys and the DeVos family.
That would be interesting, yeah.
That would be an interesting series to get into because
gosh, I mean this is like kind of a tangent about Romneys, but like it's so like I remember when he ran and he was like he identified like 3 or 4 states as like his home state.
So like what we got Utah, we got Michigan, we got Massachusetts. What's the 4th?
I can't remember what the other one. It might have just been those 3, but I feel like there was another in the mix.
Probably New York, because wasn't he working at Wall Street too? Or
I mean that would be a pretty loose association, but but yeah, it was like, Michigan, because George Romney is that big popular, and again, and people are like, oh, like popular historical figure here, but like, I mean, governors, they don't really carry, at least here, I don't think they've ever really carried the same like weight, and I think the last few have all left this state in shame. So
Yeah, who hears about Rick Snyder anymore? Like, forget the fact that Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water. The man's
Yeah.
still, out at large.
yeah,
But yeah, it's like we were saying about political dynasties. Yeah, they run on the other party too. And I mean, with George Romney, there's a deep connection there. One with like the Detroit riots.
Yep.
Because the racial demographics of the Metro Detroit area have been formed in the wake of those. You know what I mean? And you could attribute that to his handling of those events. And then also he was director of HUD. I forget it was under Nixon or under Eisenhower. I can't remember. But suburbanization basically happened under his watch.
Yeah, more or less. He was the Nixon was president when he was head of HUD.
Yeah, so I mean that's the kind of stuff I want to investigate. I'm not sure what conclusions can be made reasonably, especially on a podcast like this one, but it's worth looking into, I feel like. Yeah. So, to what we plan to discuss at the time of recording this episode, we're following up from, I want to say last week's, I think last week on Wednesday, Democrats had come to a deal on a tax and infrastructure bill that will have certain
It's the reconciliation bill.
Yeah, it is a reconciliation bill, and it will have provisions for climate and infrastructure. I had read them prior to recording this. The New York Times paywall is acting up on me. I tried looking at
only $1 a week. It says right there.
Democracy dies in darkness. Anyways, give us money. No, and the fun thing too, I'll tell this to the listeners, I try checking Politico because at least they're somewhat reliable at times, right? And then Politico, it's easy to forget they're in the bag of like the energy business
Everything.
at times. So they're in yeah, that's true. They're in their fucking bag. And I was just looking at like, okay, I just looked up climate bill, and then I looked at one of the articles because the title looked interesting. Immediately under the title, this article brought to you by Chevron, and I'm like, But yes, to that effect, Schumer and Manchin were able to come to a deal on this bill. They're trying to pass it through reconciliation. If I understand correctly, some of the provisions will include renewing infrastructure, renewing certain family assistance programs.
This is more or less this is a deal on the bill that they've been trying to pass that Manchin and Sinema both been.
The Build Back Better bill, basically.
Yeah. This is more or less that. They've made obviously concessions to Manchin. A lot of them are more so state, like West Virginia focused, which is just kind of insane. But like this was like a kind of a shocking development, right? And I think from what I've heard, the going wisdom of why Manchin suddenly decided, let's do this, is because like there were some scathing editorials written about him.
So stricken by conscience, Joe Manchin comes.
I don't know if I would go that far.
That's how he would sell it, I'm sure. But
yeah, because I mean, obviously you have the infamous visual of like the people on like kayaks like outside his yacht, begging him to. I can't remember if it was Build Back Better, if it was something else at the time, but like just begging for his vote, and he's like, well, I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's like for the senator from West Virginia, which is like again one of the poorest in the nation. He drives pretty ostentatious cars. He has this big ass yacht.
Oh, yeah.
The mansion is ungodly huge. You know what I mean? Like he has a lot of personal effects that just like again, as U.S. senators taking material.
And former governor of West Virginia too.
He was former governor.
Yeah, he's been entrenched there a long ass time.
Jesus. Oh my god. Yeah, so like what did they say in these editorials? Like was it the kind of like how does Joe Manchin manage to be in the party?
It was I think it was more so like they're like the ones where it's like, well, this is like I can't remember exactly, but I think they're basically of the ilk of the genre that he is kind of sabotaging the party. That like you know I think our first hate read was on like the one about how like cinema is like God's gift to the Democratic Party.
Right.
But I guess we're getting a lot of not so God's gift to the Democratic Party for Manchin. Again, he doesn't have the whole girl boss thing to kind of compensate for his insufficiencies in that regard. So
Mhm.
I guess they were eating away at him, and he didn't like the criticism from people that he actually cares about, not from us or
Well, and
anyone else
even then,
conscious.
it's like, yeah, he compromises, but then like if I understand correctly, and this is for me trying to remember an article I read a week ago, is basically just don't touch coal in West Virginia, and you'll get
More or
what you
less,
want.
yeah.
Well, I'm so ready for the endorsement of Joe Manchin as a climate hero for this, but here we come.
Well, he's more of a climate hero than maybe some other people we might discuss this week.
Well, well, and that's where this gets interesting too, right? Because the prevailing theory earlier this year was that, yeah, Joe Manchin and Sinema are willing to take the heat because they can get away with having this like bad boy image or whatever. But it's a question of, are they also running cover for other Democrats who are squeamish about voting for something, right? And there's been less of those kind of conversations surrounding this. But almost immediately, as soon as this happens, there's coverage about Cinema being the next person to hold things up.
Yeah, and at least as of now, I don't believe she has necessarily voiced that she will stop it, but she has not voiced support. I think she has maybe mentioned that, and this kind of ties into other things like the PACT Act with the veterans burn pit health extension
Yeah, we'll get to that
stuff. Where
next.
like with the idea that us passing this would maybe make it harder to get Republican votes on other things. Which, I mean, what's the point of reconciliation if you're going to be like, well, if we pass this, then we just lose everything else. I think she's probably, I don't know. I mean, Manchin at least makes sense to me, right? Because like the West Virginia coal stuff and whatnot, as poor as that state is, that's really the only thing that they've really got going for them. And, capitalism will soon sort itself out and they won't have anything. But, he at least makes sense to me, but she never did. Like, it seems like she's just like it seems like she definitely is chasing that like bad boy or bad girl brand, but like it's not advantageous politically. I don't think we're gonna get like new carve outs for like, I mean, what fossil fuel industry runs amok in Arizona? Like, I don't know, like with the exception of this hydraulic fracking plant there or something. I mean, I don't even know if fracking occurs in Arizona, to be completely honest. I'm kind of spitballing here, but like, there's not really a good reason for her to oppose this other than her just being, a piece of shit, which I guess she is. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to kind of see where this develops. Hopefully, this is more just a road bump than, a proper, police barricade, but who knows?
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, this is where you can correct me on pro wrestling terminology, right? But it's like, is Cinema just a good heel for the Democratic Party?
I mean,
Because
a
like
good heel still gets beaten up at the end. So I mean, when's is her primary this election? I don't remember.
When was she elected? I think like during the Trump years, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
but I think she like technically filled in a seat. Because I think she has McCain's.
That might be the case. I think that might be the case. But then it was
She has
also
McCain or Flakes. I don't remember who.
That's actually true because Mark Warner and her came in at the same time that Flake and McCain leave office. McCain because he dies, and then Flake because, well, he flaked.
Yeah.
I'm not trying
Yeah.
to pick up on there. That's actually what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, because it does feel a bit like kayfabe, where like the party can always run back and say, "Well, we can't get this done because cinema won't let it happen."
Yeah,
And then,
I mean, but it doesn't advantage them at this point, anyways, because like you got the deal with Mansion.
mm-hmm.
There's no like, there's no reason to throw that lifeline out just to pull it out from under you again. If that's like, you know, if this is really on behalf of more people, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and like I don't know, the way I try to see this now is if you look at the Senate and Congress as this network of influence and these networks of patronage, right?
Sure.
Manchin still makes sense because in exchange for his patronage and his influence, he gets his array of personal effects and wealth.
Yeah.
It's very easy to explain why he does it. With cinema, it's like you can almost go insane trying to figure out her rationale, because she doesn't give interviews. She's very secretive. When she does say something, it's very vague. She has the whole manic pixie girl energy thing going for her, but like you don't know if that's sincere or if that's an act. And there's this like series of things where it's like, is she genuinely that way? Because the assumption of Arizona is that it's a purple state, so this act of being moderate is all she can offer people in exchange for her patronage and influence. I don't know, but also like I'm just trying to think of it in a material sense, right? Where it's like Arizona. I mean, I'm trying to think like what is their economic base other than like the defense industry, military bases, and like maybe mining. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and like that's the thing is that's like, you know, with Mansion, like I mean, not only do you have that network of influence, but like you have the network, you have the conditions of West Virginia itself that we've already kind of discussed. Arizona, and again, it's like, you know, not only is it weird, but you also have a Democratic senator from there already, you know, with Mark Kelly, and he doesn't seem to have an issue supporting most of these things. There was one bill, I don't remember what it was, that he did vote down with her and like another Democrat. But for the most part, he is generally supportive of the agenda. And like you also have weird things where like, yeah, it's a, you know, purplish state or whatever, but like, you know, when she voted down the minimum wage, it's like, well, the federal minimum wage, even with that, was lower than the minimum wage just passed in Arizona.
Right.
So like there's, you know, I don't know if she's just preparing for the lobbying gig, but even then, like, you know, and I guess in some ways, right, you know, like, okay, she has like the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so that shows that like, you know, that's a line on the resume, right, that like, oh yeah, I can, you know, work across the aisle, blah blah blah, you know, that's useful for a lobbyist, I guess. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily sure that like just the flamboyancy of like her persona and her record is really something that is that attractive to employers.
Yeah, I mean it's giving Marie Antoinette, if anything.
Yeah.
But like you're making some sense there, where it's like the lobbying gig may explain some of this.
But even then, I mean, like the vast majority of members who want it get it. Like I mean, again, like, and this is sort of, you know, to use research terminology, you know, kind of selecting on the DV, where, you know, I'm not really looking at people who like applied for a lobbying job but didn't get it, and you know, that's not available anyways. But like, you know, there's people across the spectrum who get lobbying gigs, you know, and I mean, you get some pretty left-wing people who work for different, like, you know, corporations that don't intend as much, you know, ill will to their fellow man, but you get others who, you know, yeah, like, okay, you know, this person who's a shill for the health industry, healthcare industry in Congress is a healthcare industry lobbyist. Like, that makes sense. But like, her stuff just doesn't really, like, unless you really want specifically like a fossil fuel gig, or she doesn't know, she's just like, I'll just take whatever that can be given. So I'm gonna like have this weird record. I don't know. It's very weird.
So, yeah, I know we were talking about this in a completely different context last episode about how like party discipline cannot exist in the American system because of the way first past the post works effectively. Yeah. Like, yes, they're party whips and leaders, but effectively you win the seat on your own merit, and you can voluntarily take on the party ideology and stance and platform. But
well, and the parties themselves just have to be so broad to even
right.
Have a sufficient coalition.
Yeah, I mean, both of them take even the Republicans with their weird turn are still broadly a big tent approach, right? So I guess I don't know. The way I'm looking at this is like, the more cinema continues to stay still and be like a roadblock, the more value I guess she can pretend to accrue from when she does act. It's kind of like, she'll be like, I'll be thinking about it. And you don't know if she's going to vote to shut something down or not give you the leverage. But basically, to get her to act becomes more valuable to her. So it's like, okay, what can we give you in exchange for you doing this? She can extract more of a cost in that sense.
Yeah.
Is she operating on that level? I cannot know that. But in practice, that's what it's looking like. Is like, to get cinema to do something you want, you have to do something that will give her some insane benefit, is what it's looking like.
And to be fair, I mean, that will close doors for her in the long run too. Like, as I said, there's people across the spectrum who get different lobbying gigs or whatever post Congress, but like, I mean, there's gonna be like, I mean, the party apparatus isn't probably going to be interested in having her in any meaningful role.
Probably not.
There's probably a lot of firms that won't touch her. Just because, like, like it's just this weird flippancy, and like, these more centrist Dems they're no strangers to the party. I mean, we've always had them. Your Liebermans, your McCaskells. You had a lot over time that had different positions, but I think they all had some level of like consistency that was, respected. Like, yeah, like you knew going in to certain bills, you were not going to have Lieberman's vote. And
or if you wanted his vote, you could buy it. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, whereas like,
you like get something for her state.
Yeah,
you've got that in.
Yeah, whereas cinema just doesn't like, like, I don't think she is thinking of that, like, as far as like, what kind of cost can I like, extract? Because like, there's no evidence she's really extracting that cost.
I don't know. As far as I'm seeing it, she's playing a high stakes a game of Vegas poker in her mind, and you got to know when to hold them, and you got to know when to fold. And Senator Kristen Sinema, America is asking you to fold.
Yeah,
because that hand is gonna bust real fucking soon. It's like,
well, and that's the thing too, because like it's come up before with like why doesn't Manchin just change parties and whatnot, and like the answer is pretty simple. Like, he has leverage here. He doesn't have leverage with the Republicans. McConnell has screwed him more times than like he can count.
Even Biden back in the day when he was younger, like he kind of, I wouldn't say he played as ostentatious a role, but you could argue like to some extent that's kind of what he did. He was a little more active in the approach. Like he'd introduce some really problematic stuff, but for any of the financial stuff, making Delaware like the Switzerland of America, shit, give him an AIG windbreaker. He's your man.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like, you have, there's a reason these people are in the party. Whereas like, you have to have like, there needs to be something more gluing this together. And as cinema doesn't have it, Manchin does to some extent. Yes, he's frustrating. He is no climate hero for this. He's not, any of that. But at least I'm glad he seems to be on the table. Hopefully, Cinema doesn't demand a different deal that he won't be on the table for. Hopefully, she just caves and we get this bill. I mean, it's not as good as it could be, but it's pretty good for Congress standards.
Yeah, all things considered, let's fingers crossed. Our brave Speaker of the House makes it back in time for the floor vote. We'll
Right.
see. We'll see. Speaking of more Senate chicanery, let's also talk about this failure to pass a bill for veterans aid. I think this was called the PACT Act.
Yeah.
And I think the stipulation of it was pretty much that for veterans who were working at what were called burn sites or burn pits, they were exposed to toxic fumes and waste, and that leads to deleterious health effects down the line, which funny people don't realize the military industrial complex does some pretty heinous shit with the environmental stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, in addition to what we do to the planet, it also fucks up our veterans. It fucks up our troops. And the whole shtick we offer to them is, hey, the VA's got it covered, except they didn't. And what the PACT Act was supposed to do in practice was you wouldn't have to prove what had happened in order to get VA coverage and care. And if I'm recalling the schematics of how this went down, I think 25 senators basically voted against, kind of sunk it, many of them being Republicans, if not all.
Yeah, all of them are Republicans. Basically, I mean, to kind of give a little bit more context.
Yeah.
So initially, this was, I think it was Senator Toomey had raised an objection to it, saying that because it had some type of tax provision, it could not originate in the Senate. It had to go through the House because of kind of this weird, archaic constitutional construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the few things that we've really kept that pertains to the Senate. Is it stupid? Yes, but you don't want to risk the Supreme Court striking it down. It would be difficult to reach the court, I believe, but because you'd have to. The way our legal system works is there has to be a victim litigating the case. And I don't know how you claim to be a victim of that, but maybe you're I'm victimized because they've damaged my income by taxing me or something. I don't know.
That's true.
Anyways.
But also, if I understand correctly, the Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate has more pull for whatever reason, which is why it must have originated there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a clerical issue, right?
Okay.
So they go through it, fix that. Then we get a failure to get closure, right? So technically, more than 25, because I think it was 42 Republicans ended up voting against the cloture vote.
Mm-hmm.
So this now is kind of just sitting there in this sort of dead state under the filibuster. They kind of disguised this as and defended it with the idea that, oh, this allows for amendments to fix their issues with it. The main argument is that it quote unquote provides a $400 million slush fund. This bill's getting a decent amount of coverage in the news, in part because Jon Stewart has been really, really tied to the advocacy for this. He's been even before he left the Daily Show, was always kind of tied to a lot of these veteran and first responder healthcare bills. He's been usually there for committee hearings at Congress to push for these things, and so this is kind of brought him back in the spotlight, arguing with these ghouls like Toomey, Ted Cruz, of course, because why wouldn't he be on the side of thinking this? And yeah, one of the justifications too, is more generally or the defenses of their actions here is that Democrats sort of pulled the rug out from under them by passing or attempting to go through this reconciliation bill. I think there was another bill, I think the CHIPS, that they did vote for because they were under the assumption the reconciliation bill wasn't going to happen. And now that it seems like it is, they're just incensed that, the Dems, I guess, are legislating in bad faith in their eyes.
Yeah, I mean, when you like propose that we talk about this on the podcast today, like I had kind of, first of all, like I don't know if this is me at just not paying enough attention or if there's a lack of coverage. But the first thing that popped into my mind is like, we're talking about veterans again? Because like, at least like less than 5 years ago, like, veterans issues were one of those things that like were always in the news.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things that's considered widely uncontroversial, and people are always dying to show their enthusiasm for supporting the veterans, right? And it's the kind of thing too that both parties can accuse one of each other for not doing enough for veterans, but pretty universally I feel like Congress members of both parties find a way to screw veterans over. And I think
Just
like
usually in the dark.
usually, yeah. And like when I saw this, I'm just like, why is this not getting covered in the way this normally would have been?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is getting some coverage. I mean, I don't watch a ton of like the cable news, but I at least see stuff pop up on Twitter where it's clips from
Right.
cable news and whatnot. So it does seem to be getting some traction and whatnot. I mean, I think one of the notable things, and like you had kind of written this down in the outline, is that kind of like it's weird that like I think Republicans have tended to kind of take issue ownership of military and veteran affairs.
Mm-hmm.
You can debate whether or not that's correct or incorrect, but they've kind of largely in the public side's taken issue ownership of that. But we've kind of seen a hard turn away from that. I mean, I think you had comments from Trump that weren't really pushed back on, making fun of people for joining the military, calling them suckers and losers and stuff like that, and like all these things, and like that really wasn't getting pushed back on. And then you have like this is sort of this ultimate, flipping of the bird, the two veterans.
And that's the thing too. There's like a rise of Dan Crenshaw, ex-military veteran types, right? All big faces during the Trump administration. Like even not just the members of Congress. Like who was his one Secretary of the Interior? Ryan Zinke, that guy. Yeah, that guy was a Marine or something, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a bunch of like ex-military types in the Trump camp, but that kind of civic religion approach to veterans issues has like dissipated with the Trump years. I feel like
For sure.
And it kind of just like happened in front of everyone's eyes. I that was something that came as a realization to me. But
well, I think too, like January 6th probably didn't help, right? This like kind of like we're inviting an insurrection in the Capitol. That's kind of even if they didn't necessarily disagree politically with those people, that like in just the basic sense of Trump support, not necessarily that the election had been stolen. I think that kind of made it, like how do you claim to be like the party of like patriotism when you have like these American symbols in peril?
Yeah, which again ties to Joe Biden's weird speech with the open eyes, but that's a separate point. And another thing I wrote in the outline, and I don't know if I'm making a false equivalency here or if this is something valid, right? But like the Havana syndrome relief bill passed without any issues. Just Havana syndrome, we don't even know if it's real or if it's something we're just making up. But yeah, if you're in Langley and you had a tummy ache, we got you covered. And then here are like people who've done worse and actually been the victims of what I can only consider as occupational safety mishandling, really.
Mm-hmm.
And like the VA is one of those institutions that's supposed to cover this, you know what I mean? And it's like it's hurdles for people who American civic religion is supposed to venerate. Here we are, just like kind of tossing this under the rug.
Yeah, and it's just weird too because like there's not. I don't like I don't know if they're trying to play like a blame game politics with this.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they are, but like I mean, Ted Cruz is just like the worst player of blame game politics. He always
Mm-hmm.
engages with it, but like and like this is kind of what he rose to fame with, right? On like the shutdown and whatnot, and he always loses. So it's just weird seeing people on that side just sort of like let's just keep doing it. Like let's yeah, and, like obviously, we have our own thoughts about these, individuals as people, like their basic humanity and whatnot. But it's just, it's weird that you would just put this like out in the open again, like keep relitigating this like nonsense, and like no one cares. People care that you like are trying to screw veterans. That's all that
Mhm.
matters at the end of the day.
Let me get that. Hang on.
Sure.
Goddamn spam calls in the middle of my podcast.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah, I mean,
Was it relief for your student loan?
no, it wasn't.
I got one of those earlier.
No, I actually got a call from my student loan servicer, ironically.
Okay.
And they were basically like, the old company's been dissolved. We took over. You ready for repayments, buddy? And I'm like, oh God.
Oh no.
But I mean, yeah, to your point, like Ted Cruz and on all these ghouls, right? I think they continue to serve those kind of libidinal tendencies in the base of the Republican Party, much like an equivalent Democrat does on their side. You know what I mean? Like you could say Adam Schiff gets all the Russiagate people like really excited. And you could say Ted Cruz is like he basically made his career being a guy who blamed the Democrats for everything. His whole claim to fame was that stupid filibuster where he's quoting Green Eggs and Ham, right? And he just
Which wasn't a real filibuster, to be fair. But...
No, he was just basically holding his piss as long as he could. That's really what it was. But yeah, like he's just all this is another exercise in the resentment-based politics that we have at this point. And you could say that, hey, maybe he paved the way for Trump's style of politics. Who knows? Maybe you could say that he's a proud conservative, fighting the good fight against global homo. Who knows? But I mean, what it continues to do is what we're pointing at, obviously, is the basic institutions that this country has that are promised to help people as who do the thing. I'm going into Bidenisms here. The whole point is that if you're a veteran, you get remunerated for your service. That's it. We can't even do that anymore. But we can get more resentment.
Yeah.
And like we've said about everything, veterans are just another political football in this.
Yeah, 100%. And as I say, and this is, I don't have a ton to say about this one. It was just kind of like it was sort of, kind of being connected in the discourse to the climate bill. It's more just kind of like nonsense. And like it's just weird because this seems like it should have otherwise been a pretty non-controversial bill, but now it's becoming sort of this media focal point on the legislative process.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that this is going to come back with amendments as promised, or is this going to be something that's like a hot topic for a couple weeks, but then ultimately fizzles out?
I mean, to be fair, I don't think the amendments that they're talking about are actually going to happen per se. I think they'll be forced to pass it. I think it's just going to be too controversial not to. I mean, like I'm sure Ted Cruz will still vote it down, but like, the Romneys or whoever like didn't vote for cloture they're going to have to cave, I think. You only need 5. That's not hard to get. Well, hard for other things. I don't think it's going to be hard for this in the not too long term. So I see this passing, and again, as I said, I kind of compared this to like the shutdown in what was that, 12 or 14, from Ted Cruz, where he makes an ass of himself and it doesn't pay out.
I mean, he could always start a podcast. That's what I did.
Oh man, surprised he doesn't. Like, he let Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene like scoop him on that.
Like I'm trying to think like how many of like, I don't know if we talked about this like a while ago, but like the influencer generation in Congress, like Dan Crenshaw has a weird YouTube channel. AOC has her Instagram lives.
And she had a brief stint as a Twitch streamer.
Yeah, I mean, the Twitch stream was just like, it was a little fun thing. I don't think she's ever done that full time, but like the Instagram.
Yeah, she's only like done like 2, I think. But
yeah, and was invited for those. But then it's like even like what Marjorie Taylor Greene has like. I think she's one of the few representatives who probably doesn't have a staffer using her Twitter account.
I mean, to be fair, I was gonna say Chuck Grassley 100% does not have a staffer using his Twitter account. that is raw. I think it's actually known because there was someone who wrote a conference paper that I read where they said they like talked, and I mean, I didn't buy this premise at all, but they're like talking about how he was cutting edge for like not having a staffer use his social media. I'm like, come on. Like,
and he's doing like Newt Gingrich style wife posting, basically. He's not doing any.
Like, I mean, he infamously like tweeted about it like a dead bird, and then tweeted about it like 6 years later about like, is anyone gonna come pick this up? And it's like, I mean, there's no way the dead bird's still there. There's no like.
See, I thought it was funny when like Ted Cruz had those 2 gaffes where. Again,
where he liked some porn on his main account.
Yeah,
or staffer probably did, but it was probably him.
Hey, we've all been there, but come on, man, you got to be quicker than that.
Or the most recent one, who was that?
It was some like city or federal agency that like something like lewd. I forgot.
No. There was that, but no, there was a recent. Oh yeah. Che Garcia.
Oh, the Chuy Garcia thing when he uses the art, and that was definitely a staffer. But I'm just like, man, which one of your staffers was like some Chicago DSA kid who was mad at anarchists?
It's funny because I mean, like, yeah, I don't really agree with the guy that he's replying to, but like,
it was just like the guy forgot. Like, and you know what it is like it was his personal account. And he had the add other account button plugged in the one for Chuy Garcia. Forgot which one he was on. That's my Twitter behavior, right? Because I got my personal and then I have the one for the podcast, so I just like use both interchangeably at this point. But if you're using like a professional public facing thing, I wouldn't be so cavalier about that.
Oh yeah, I mean that was pretty good though.
It was funny. It was. Oh man. Okay, is there anything else I got on the? So
should we touch on the actual climate hero of this generation?
We can.
Let's do it. I think it's fun.
Yeah, fuck the outline. We can do this another day.
So this Taylor Swift thing is really weird.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. This kind of came out of nowhere, but all of a sudden, it was people just started talking about the fact that she's kind of in the past couple of years have become more openly left-wing political and whatnot, whereas before she kind of
a member of the Democratic Party. I wouldn't say she was left-wing, but
as far as like
mainstream American discourse, yeah.
Pro-environment stuff like that. But like all of a sudden, people are like, well, like she uses a private jet a ton. And this is just like kind of exploded like the internet discourse, like where people are like, screw her, it's all rhetoric, it's while she actively damages the environment. And then you have other people like defending her where it's like, well, she actually sold one of her private jets.
And I think that's what made it trigger, right? Because like I think there was a list of like top 10 worst polluting celebrities. I don't know how they investigated that, right?
Okay.
That's what I believe the origin to be. And
because I just like randomly saw people like that I followed who don't normally like talk about this stuff. We're just like, fuck Taylor Swift for this specific reason. I was like,
because the
okay,
memes
like,
explode and then you see a bunch of them, right? But like so like the list is what triggers it. And then you have, of course, like the kind of like branch of the right that's always like, look at these liberal celebrities and Hollywood sickos telling us how to live, right? And I at least that's what I remember is like Taylor Swift is a climate extremist who does a lot of polluting, and like I think that
climate terrorist is the term I've seen used.
Some shit like that, like some culture war style screed. And then in response, a Taylor Swift stan or staffer. I'm not clear who.
Staffer.
Like someone on her PR team. Some PR team, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like again, like to be a celebrity, you have like this micromanaging team. They're basically like congressional staff as far as we're concerned, but but you're right, PR would be the distinction. So I think a member of her PR team like goes and writes this whole thread about like, yeah, she actually sold one of her private jets. She's done this, X, Y, and Z, all the charitable stuff, right? But then humor is about contradiction, right? And then it just turned into like we were talking about this on the last episode too, right? Where it's like, well, you as an ordinary person without the wealth and means to exploit, what are you doing to the environment versus like a coal baron's net damage to the environment? You know what I mean?
You're right.
And it kind of the sticking point of the article was that Taylor
apparently
Swift,
she was listening to this and was like, oh, well, I'm an individual just like everyone else in my mind.
right.
What am I doing wrong?
Right. It's like yeah, so the whole thing is like she takes her private jet like needlessly to places that like were nearby, or like that were driving distance, shit like that. So then the whole like the nature of Twitter jokes as they are, you exploit the contradiction for what it is, and it's just like Taylor Swift on the way to 7-Eleven, and it's like a flight, or it's like
like it's like an F-22 like at an air show, just like zooming along.
The worst one that like had me was like it was her and a bunch of people at like a party laughing at something they were watching on the phone. And the video on the phone was that oil rig fire in the Gulf of Mexico from like last year. I was just
I think that was years ago, wasn't it? Or was there another one?
No, I'm not talking about Exxon Valdez. I'm talking about the one where like
there was one last year.
The Pemex thing which just looked like hellfire coming out the sea. That one.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it's like what we were talking about, where like there is this massive contradiction between personal consumption as part of the uber rich and personal consumption as an everyday person.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like in America, we're still somewhat culpable. We have higher living standards, so these things can compound versus someone who lives in the third world, right? But it still doesn't change the fact that like we were saying earlier, like you could do everything to go green, as they say, and it doesn't change the fact that like you could bicycle everywhere and you're still not driving down Taylor Swift's damage to the atmosphere.
It was fun. I did see one person saying like, well, have you compared like the like just the amount of, and they were talking like the net, like how much emissions are put out by aircraft versus cars. And I'm like, you do know, like, again, it's like, just know your measurement, what you're actually, and what that measurement actually is.
Right.
Because like, this was like, I'm like, yeah, like a flight that has like, 100 people on it versus, 100 people in cars. Yeah. Like turns out 100 cars is putting out a little bit more, but her and her, little, 5-man entourage or whatever fly into Starbucks. Or, I mean, I always wonder, because I know there was, I think Khloe Kardashian fell into this too, but there was less of hypocrisy there because people just always kind of thought she was a little bit of a soulless celebrity, I guess. But there was a bunch of these things about she was taking 5-minute helicopter rides. I'm like, where are you going?
This is giving me Trump in New York City vibes, where he would be helicoptering around the city for no apparent
at least
reason.
There, I'm like, okay, you could just go to one skyscraper or the other, but especially a private jet, where are you going?
Right.
There's only so many places you can land, unless you go full Harrison Ford, there's only so much you can do.
Right. I mean, it is that whole thing, right? Where this is just something I was thinking of, is that there was a lot of hay made about carbon footprints, especially back in the day. And the whole campaign to popularize that measurement was kind of funded by Exxon and BP.
Yeah.
And
that was their contribution to the movement.
I mean, here's the thing too. It's like fossil fuel companies have known about climate change prior to it being discovered by scientists. Their own research teams found out about it and kind of kept it under wraps, and have broadly constrained what can and cannot be discussed or done about it, right? And like I said, we've been saying, carbon footprint puts you back in that individualistic thought mode of, well, I need to reduce my own individual footprint. But the thing too about 100 cars versus one private jet, we're also stuck in car dependent places now.
Yeah.
We kind of don't have choices in certain places, you know what I mean? Not necessarily that oh, we got to fight the system and why aren't we doing it? I mean in the sense of if you live in a place with no public transit, if you live in a place with no walkable streets, if you literally live in places where the grocery store is literally on a main road, you cannot walk to it from your house.
Well, and just going to work too. I mean, the whole work online, that era is, I think, fast approaching its end. Some people are still able to, but for the most part, it's full on back to work, or at least back to work a good chunk of the week.
Right.
I mean, as I said, we're basically pretending the pandemic is over.
Yeah, I don't know. It is a very funny series of memes that I think highlights that reality and contradiction.
And it kind of goes to kind of the overarching theme of this whole show, right? The idea that you have, performative rhetoric versus actual results.
Right. And the performative rhetoric often stops you from getting results. It's totalizing in that aspect.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe one day they'll make electric private jets to counteract the issue. Who knows?
Just attach some solar panels to it. Don't you think they'd be perfect?
I've
fly in a storm, but
I've looked at solar fight proposals. I don't know what the feasibility is on those.
I would think it can't be at least with current tech, can't be super feasible, because you'd think it would just seem natural, right? Cut out any need to pay for fuel.
Yeah, I guess the only question is then how do you drive the thing at night?
Yeah. You'll have the backup fleet. I don't know. or you can do the GM approach to electric vehicles for the longest time was just the hybrid.
Yeah, break away from hybrid to eventually full on EV, but I don't know. This kind of stuff requires a radical consideration and then application of what exists, and this is where
for the solar flights you just fly whatever way the sun's going. Every flight has to follow.
I mean, this is where I just see. This is where I just keep coming back to what the fuck was wrong with trains?
I mean, they
In
can't
fact,
go overseas, but yeah, I mean, like, domestically, there should be nothing wrong.
I mean, yeah, you got to figure out something with boats and like planes still.
They
But
weren't,
like,
because Amtrak's not turning a profit. Come on.
man, and to top it off, like Amtrak, USPS, the USPS shit where they want to cut 50,000 jobs.
Oh yeah, it's insane.
What are we gonna do then? Just have only UPS? Is that are we back to like private mail as the way forward?
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, like, the way that that's being run, it's like it doesn't make any sense to me that, like, you can't get rid of the guy by law. Is I thought that most of those laws were struck down or deemed, but I guess yes, this one remaining position is politically independent, quote unquote. But I don't know. And
Right.
it's some of it is it's not just it's the American political imagination that kind of needs a fixing. That, like, yeah, it's fine that it'd be fine if Amtrak doesn't make a dime ever. Like, I mean, there needs to be more investment put into it. There's been enough high profile crashes over the years. The overall, I mean, pretty low when all things considered, and a lot of them are drivers' faults. Like road drivers, not the train operator. But yeah, I mean, we should invest more in that. And you're right, like, it's not
Like, come on, Amtrak Joe. That was the one thing I was counting on you for.
yeah.
Oh man. All right. I think we're approaching that 1 hour, 1.5 hour mark. Do you want to do our hate read series or the editorial discussion before we start to close out?
Let's do the hate read.
Let's do the hate read. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we only got one in before, because I think we had to cut the one before for time, but let's get this one in.
Yeah. Let's get this one in. Okay. So thank you. This is blissfully short, and for what it's worth, the article is actually well written. It's the content that's the appalling bit. So let me share my screen to you, so at least you can take a look at this.
I've got it open on mine, actually.
You got it? Okay, cool. Okay.
Should I delve in, or do you want to have the honors?
I can get into it. So this is from the Miami Herald, published on July 28th. It's not a bad joke. It's a bad idea. Miami may dump homeless on an island. It sounded like some kind of sick joke at first, but it's true. Miami is considering moving its homeless people to an island, putting them in a camp next to a sewer plant on Virginia Key out in Biscayne Bay. The comparisons were instantaneous, vicious, and hard to disregard. Internment camp, penal colony. Awful, shameful images, even as Miami aspires to be the city of the future.
Let's be real. This is the city of the future.
Like, wasn't an apartment complex that was under construction just get washed recently?
No, but I mean, you did have the bigger one where it was a complex that, like, collapsed because it was built on I can't remember, like, it was built on unstable land. It was basically built right on sand, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
And it just, like, half of it collapsed.
Yeah, with people in it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, a lot of people died.
So much for City of the Future. All right. We could go on. The internet certainly did when the news broke that the Miami City Commission might actually entertain this offensive possibility. No matter how temporary this move is supposed to be, it's billed as a transition zone. It feels like one more attempt in Miami to push the homeless out of sight. Invisibility is already a problem for the poor. This would have the potential to make it many magnitudes worse. Miami was just sued by Legal Services of Greater Miami, Southern Legal Counsel, and the ACLU over the treatment of people living on its streets. I'm losing my patience with this article because the proposal is like getting me pissed.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably leave it at that. I mean, it just kind of gets into that a little bit more, but yeah, it's weird that there's been this sort of resurrection in, like, anti-homelessness, and not like anti-homelessness and like let's solve homelessness. It's like no,
But
let's
like in a war on drugs kind of sense.
yeah, and like I mean, you've had places where they're putting like spikes under bridges and whatnot, so homeless people can't sleep there. I think Trump had more or less proposed something similar to this. Not so much move them to an island, but like put them like remove like all the homeless people to like a city. Uh, it's like well they're already in a few, but yeah, and like I mean, in this there was something in my local town has like a homeless guy who's been
Mhm.
here for years. I haven't seen him in a while, but I know there was this thing from the township to like kick him out a few years ago.
I recall this. Yeah.
They're like, let's just give him like a one-way bus ticket and get him out of here, I guess. And like
I'm
it
guessing
got a
he's
lot of
priced out of
backlash.
any housing in that area, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, 100% probably. But I mean, as I said, he's been homeless for a long time. But that got killed. That effort to do it, I can't remember. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen him, but like,
Mhm.
yeah, this was like just this weird thing, and like the general response to it was like, this is pretty barbaric. Like,
Mhm.
just because we're concerned with what it says about the township. They're like, well, it was fine when he was behind the Kmart, but it's not okay when he's like in front of Main Street. Like, ugh. Um, but yeah, there's just been like this weird reignition in like, and that was a couple years ago, but like all this other stuff was really recent. I don't know where it's coming from. A lot of people are like, well, like rich people don't like being made to feel guilty. I'm like, I get that, but this isn't like new.
It's really not, and it's like as long as you continue to have these bizarre stratifications in society, right? Like I feel like what homeless people serve as a function is as like a disciplining tool for like lower and middle class people, where it's like if you don't keep up, this is what happens to you. There is no safety net. And
Yeah,
it's like again, like America's treatment of homeless people is like abject. This like I would say it's again it parallels what we mock third world countries for, where it's like, well, aren't people like paupers in the streets there? It's like we kind of do that to our own people here too. And like with the pandemic, I think these things got somewhat more visible in the suburbs for the first time when you
mhm.
had people get priced out of their own homes or like unable to make payments or
Well,
whatever.
even now too, with just the way like rent's increasing in a lot of places.
Right, right. Like people are feeling the squeeze first and foremost, but then there's people who have been squeezed to the point that like they are again part of this new class of the dispossessed. And it's just happening closer and closer to the suburbs, which are, the depository of like nice, respectable, far away from all the suffering of the cities kind of shit, right?
Yeah,
And when it just happens so close to home, I guess that's what prompts that kind of like barbaric response because we again like we're culturally conditioned to view people who are homeless with crime, disease, filth, all that bullshit. And it's like I'm not gonna say that like every experience of dealing with someone who doesn't have a home is pleasant, but it's again it's like this kind of like conditioned um antisocial misanthropic behavior that's like normalized. You know what I mean? It's
mhm.
okay to make fun of and dispossess and harm these people. Like if you want to really see things that make you upset, like look at what cops do to the homeless in urban areas, right? And like you were saying earlier with Amtrak. I know this isn't a direct parallel, but it's just one of those things where like you got to expand that kind of creative horizon
Yeah,
to the next level, which is like, okay, someone got to bum off of society's dime and has a home. Like what if we, and like that's just something that at least I recall seeing in certain pilot programs where to stop homelessness, particularly like repeat homelessness, the model shouldn't be shelters. The model should be giving people a small home of some sort. And I think the project was like using recycled like shipping containers, building a
Mhm.
small home out of that. And then you're able to solve at least a couple of the structural issues where it's like now they can apply for a job because they have a mailing address. They can apply for certain services because they have a mailing address. They're not subject to those harsh elements. So like there's less disease and all this nonsense. And I just I don't get this I don't know, this misanthropic element of American culture. And I'm not going to say that like you know, we're all inherently evil for hearing it because we get, no one is born that way. You get acculturated into it. But the prevalence of it and how vehemently it's felt in certain places, it's concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better.
And I'm not housing is not really my strong suit. It's not really like something that I understand a whole lot about, but
Mhm.
I don't think it's insane or crazy to like view housing as a human right. And I also think that like it kind of shows the limits of the current political horizon that people have, where you see failures of the system like homelessness, like crime, like a whole host of things. And your only answer to it is either get away from it or push it away from you.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much exactly what we're seeing, right? Is it's this unwillingness to like kind of come to terms with it or think of solutions and just kind of like punt it. I mean, that, it's kind of, going back to like Congress, that's always been their model of, lawmaking, right? Just punt it down the road and think about it later, right? It's why we've
From the Constitution onwards.
yeah, exactly. I mean, the constitutional conventions, like, slavery thing, like let's not even bother debating it. Let's just
We'll
we'll
handle it in
debate,
20 years. Don't
we'll
worry about
debate
it.
a few things about it, but we're not gonna, the idea of abolishing it's not really on the table because half of you have slaves, so just punt it down the road.
And I mean, I guess that
Or
is
nowadays we're gonna punt it into a neighboring island.
I think that sums up all the problems of American politics in a nutshell. I think is that it is a continued pattern of punting a problem down the road and then dealing with the blowback of having punted something down the road for too long.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people like to bill themselves as like solutions focused and solutions oriented kind of people when they get elected or when they're trying to seek your vote, but I don't think anything has aside from like maybe a couple people who got elected saying they'll do it. I don't know if they've done anything about it. How many people have actually done something transformational to the system in a while?
Yeah, pretty hard to say. I mean, and I will say that. I mean, the thing is, I think it's interesting you bring up like the solutions focused branding. I think of
The
that
problem
honestly.
solvers caucus, I mean,
Yeah,
that kind of
I
shit.
think of that more so as just like I think of it as more so performative because
Yeah.
it's like that to me is like we pursue the bipartisan solution, which tends to mean the most broadly accepted, which means it doesn't really change anything. It just it's an inch. It's like a step towards solving the problem, but never solving it, because that would require a much more radical approach in most cases. I mean, like obviously, I think the one thing we're decent at legislating to actually fully meet demands is usually disasters, which probably says enough about us that like that's the only thing that like you need like these like crazy focusing events, and even COVID relief and whatnot. It was nowhere near the degree that like other countries stepped in, but like
Mhm.
you've got a lot of these people who swear up and down that a government dollar is like the the manifestation of the devil's hand or whatever, but like they voted in favor of it.
Yeah, I think the consensus on Capitol Hill, stated implicitly, not explicitly, is that there is no fundamental changing the system. And if
Yeah.
there is, it's to benefit those on top. That's the only thing that's really allowed to be rushed through or changed. But like, this fundamental relationship of, I don't know how much you agree with my take on this, but I mean, I'll just put it out there as like, the Constitutional Convention that founded this country was basically attended by the equivalent of like today's Fortune 500. Wealthy people, businessmen, planters, lawyers, merchants, whatever you want to staff them as. That's who made this system. Is it better than some form of monarchy? Yeah, sure. I don't think that democracy is an inherently bad principle to fight for, but what they essentially ordered the society to be was one for the money-making class at the end of the day. And
yeah, and I mean, and like maybe that's the more cynical interpretation of it. I don't think it's entirely unfair. Because you're right. I mean, you look at their class standings, and they were very much interested in protecting their class interests. I don't think the system itself, like as written, is necessarily like exclusive for that. But I think that because of interpretations that have been casted down by the Supreme Court and kind of by the conservative legal movement and society at large on some level, there does need to be more radical like rewrites of the Constitution and reworking of the system in order to advance certain goals that are maybe more equitable and pro-democracy than maybe what was originally intended, but certainly more than the way things have been interpreted since.
yeah, and I think that as a whole, even like by design, the federal system, not necessarily of federalism, but like how our government is structured today, it is slow to change by design. You need very large consensuses.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the way consensus to change things.
Yeah. And it's like weird because it's like one of those things where like, on some level, I don't disagree with that. That like that being like on its surface a bad thing. But like in practice, like we've seen that like it's not exactly helping us out.
Mhm.
These large consensuses largely, align with this upper class thing. I mean, and it's like sometimes we forget just how broad these party umbrellas are, and that like ostensibly they want a lot of the same things, at least fiscally. I mean, socially, not so much these days, but there was a time where they were even more closely aligned on that.
Right. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't know like what point it is I can kind of like wrap everything around on, but it kind of in my mind, the way I'm seeing this is, for things to change, you have to fundamentally destroy the existing order in some capacity. Maybe it doesn't have to be violent and apocalyptic the way it's destroyed, but the way as things are currently structured are just not it. And as long as people continue to work within this framework or argue that it can work or are committed to preserving it, I'm not convinced anything will change.
Yeah, and I mean, especially because I think that there's like this, broader cultural conservatism on like, the idea of changing it is bad in and of itself, and we really do need to move away from that. Like,
Yeah.
there's certainly ways that can make it worse, but like the idea that like change is inherently bad is, I think, just flawed. Like, there's no reason to think like there wasn't that much consensus among the people who wrote it in the first place. Why should we, assume that that divine wisdom that they just happen to be, the compromise they could settle on would be what we, ride on forever. And you read, and it's like, some of the biggest condemnations of like the way we interpret like originalism, like if it has to literally be in the text, like, I mean, they were pretty open about this in like the Federalist Papers that like, the reluctance on like the Bill of Rights, for instance, was they didn't want that to be like seen as an exhaustive interpretation of rights. And that's exactly what we're seeing today is people are like, oh, that's it. That's all you got.
I mean, this phenomenon is exactly what I'm describing when I say greenhouse gaslighting. And the unfortunate reality is, we're 51 episodes in now. And I don't know what the world outside the greenhouse looks like, if that makes sense. When you're finally free from like the limitations you've put on your thinking and the assumptions that you've told yourself that this is the only way you can work on things, and you decide I'm going to take the step to destroy this or change it or whatever you want to say to make the words go down easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you then build? Who knows? I know I'm always like pushing things in a Marxist direction, but it's like, what does life under true socialism, communism look like? We don't know. We would be different people at that point. We would be transformed by that experience at that point. And I can only say things that are theoretical,
Yeah.
Which I think this exercise might have been more useful within the point I had in the outline, which is discussing if we're doomed to relitigate 2020 on all left podcasts. But that's what this is, right? Is we're just coming to terms with the institutions are sacrosanct at present, and there is no confronting them within them. I'm at the point where I'm in word salad mode.
It's probably, I think we've kind of reached like the natural climax and conclusion of this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not really much more we can say other than, we look to the future eagerly.
I don't know about eagerly, but
desperately more so than eagerly. But yeah, I guess, I don't know. Anything else you might want to say for the listeners before we start to close out?
I think that mostly wraps up my thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm. All right. You want to listen to a better podcast? Josh is on one. It's called
the MonsterPop podcast. Presumably the favorite destination for wrestling podcast news and reviews. Just put out episode 26 today, and recording episode 27 tomorrow. So I am a busy bee when it comes to recording things.
MonsterPop is a great show, folks. I encourage you guys to check them out. And they have been making strides with their release schedule and getting these episodes out consistently pretty much every week, I'd say. So
every week, sometimes they've been a little later in the week than we intend, but
yeah, not all of us can have a Chapo style release schedule. We don't have those nice content machines that they got at the Content Factory, but everyone in who listens to this show and enjoys pro wrestling, show them some love, follow them on social media, and help them grow by giving them a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I don't know why that helps people with the algorithm, but do it. I'm asking nicely, please.
Yeah, I'll take some 5-star reviews.
If you want this show to grow a little bit, do the same. Just give it a 5-star review and tell me like everything you really think.
Make it like the IGN style where you like complained about like a million things, but like 5 out of 5.
But he says like, too much water. 5 stars. All right. Well, thanks again for coming through, Josh. And
No
thanks
problem.
again, dear listener, for listening to Greenhouse Gaslighting. I got all the links to the social media in the description below. Till next time, take care, folks.